So, all right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Money Mindset Summit 2019. This is our second year, and in this sort of pre-launch video, we are going to talk with today Dr. Leyden. She is a PhD in clinical psychology. Yes?
Psychoneuroimmunology.
Oh my God, it gets even better. That's like my dream. Anyway, and she is going to speak to us today, not just about money and money blocks, the ones she's experienced, but she is also the receiver this year. She is our charity that we are donating to called Create Global Healing. And she's going to tell us all about the gorgeous stories there, which are always really meaningful. So you guys are in for a huge treat in today's interview. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm excited, number one, about your summit. Obviously, your generosity in offering to highlight Create Global Healing and the opportunity for us to meet for the first time in 3 years, has it been?
3 years, yeah, that I've been thinking, I want to email Lori. So Lori, can you tell us, now that we know you have I can't even believe it's psychoneuroimmunology. I'm gobsmacked. I'm so happy over this. But so can you tell us a little bit about your story of the degree into where you are now, because you've been doing this for a while.
Right. Well, for those people who don't know that term, it's really studying the mind-body-spirit connection and its relationship to stress and trauma. And so, of course, my story starts with my own trauma. This is why I'm so passionate about helping young people to heal their traumas, to give them work opportunities, and to give them opportunities to become heart-centered leaders who will lead us into a peaceful future. But just, I guess, combining my work story with my money history, I was born the oldest of 5 to Irish Catholic parents who were first generation, definitely coming from a big poverty background. My dad was a police officer working 3 to 4 jobs to support us. I actually thought we were rich until I grew up and realized we were probably upper lower class. But you can imagine just the kinds of transgenerational trauma around money that occurs. And so that's a whole topic for a whole summit.
Yep.
But, and so then having, at the age of 12, my significant traumas can kind of be summed up in my 12th year, where my mom was pregnant with my youngest sister, and my grandmother was dying. And there's an Irish proverb that says, "One new life for one old life." And I overheard them speaking, and my grandmother said, "If I go into the hospital before you have this baby, I won't live." And so I heard that. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. My grandmother died. My mother went into the hospital, gave birth, came home 2 days later during my Nana's funeral, handed me the infant child, and I was responsible for my 3 siblings and my infant sister for the next 2 years or so. And I always felt like, and at the same time, I sought solace from my parish priest and became sexually abused by that priest. So it was a pretty intense year. And I developed a soul myth that I wasn't lovable, love isn't safe, there's something terribly flawed with me, I'm not good enough, my dreams will never come true, and I'll never have the resources I need to fulfill my destiny. Now, this is key here, because you can already see the connection between money and fulfilling my destiny, which even now, so many years later, continues to reverberate. The miracles that are possible out of trauma and tragedy, which also kind of marks, my path through life. And so at that time, I just knew that I needed to be seen. I needed to be heard. I wanted somebody to see that I mattered. I wanted to love and be loved. And I wanted to be rescued from this situation that I was in. So now I developed a mechanism of protection by, just running on empty, just overachieving, have to be perfect, get good grades. If there was a way to do anything harder, faster, with more pain and struggle, I found it.
You were the lady.
Exactly. And I never really questioned what my heart's desire was, because unfortunately my heart was wounded, and I couldn't really listen to my heart. So I was always in search of what is the best way to heal. And over the years, I've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my healing, from everything from shamans sticking pins in me to any of the latest things you could imagine, just to be on that path of what's the best way we can heal, because our current methods are really painful. And as you know, they don't often involve the body as much as we need them to. So I went through, I guess, I always wanted to be a psychologist. And my first job was in the research department of the psychiatric department at my college. And I was able to hang out with psychiatrists and learn a lot about that kind of method and pathway. But then after I graduated, I got diverted into business. And so in my 20s, I had a series of, I think, 5 or 7 jobs until I landed in the hospital with a stress-related illness. And after getting out of the hospital with that, I realized it was time to take stock here, because they couldn't give me any advice about the stress. They just told me to remain calm and not eat spicy foods and things like that, and take this purple pill for indigestion. So that's when I started on my PhD work in psychoneuroimmunology. And basically, I developed these 50 strategies to help myself heal. And that really put me on a path of where I am now. And so I guess almost 30 years ago, I developed a holistic psychotherapy practice in New England. And everyone said, oh, you can't do that. You'll never make money at that. That's too out there. And of course, I had that money fear, that how was I going to earn money doing this? And all I remember is doctors were starting to refer patients to me with high blood pressure and all these what we now know are stress-related illnesses. And they would say, I don't know what she's doing over there, but you need to go there. And then they would come back and he could drop their medications. And one woman who had cardiomyopathy that has a 20% chance of survival went back after 6 months to her doctors, and they said, oh, it's a spontaneous recovery. And of course, you and I know, we did diet and exercise and meditation, and we went right to the core wounds to heal them. And she tried to explain all of that to them, but they were just not having it. It was too far out of their wheelhouse. And it wasn't safe, for them to hear all that, because they would have to question their own path. Exactly. So that was one situation. And then fast forward to my near-death experience in 2003. I was going through another stressful period, and I set an intention to heal with the sacred masculine. And that just put me on this path where within 12 weeks, I had to face the chauvinism inside of me, inside of my marriage, inside of how I operated. And so in the space of 12 weeks, I left my home, my marriage, my cats, and I had emergency surgery with complications that left me in the hospital for a month. And at that point, I had this near-death experience in which, at the point where I had stopped breathing, I heard this loud voice in my head say, everything in life is a choice, including taking the next breath. And I was in a very sacred spiritual moment at that point. I felt connected. I looked back at my life and I thought, well, this is a surprise. I didn't think it would end this way, but I've helped a lot of people and I just want to be out of pain and I feel complete. And so, much like the near-death experiences that others have, I felt that floating sensation. And as I was floating and feeling like this is just so amazing, I'm ready, from the other side of my hospital curtain, my 80-year-old roommate at 3:00 in the morning out loud says, "Dear God, please help my roommate. She's really, really sick." You can't make this stuff up. And I just remember, I'd been in pain for a month and I lost 20% of my body weight. It was crazy. And all of a sudden, like it said, the divine is not done with you yet. And I took a breath in to laugh. And that laughter, I wasn't laughing, but the effort to laugh brought that air back into my lungs and slammed me back into that body. And there are a number of other in-between stories here, but I made a decision to follow my heart wherever it went. I made a decision at that point, and this is really important for our money blocks. I realized that I had never truly received emotionally and energetically and perhaps even in the monetary way because I didn't feel it was safe. And so I made a decision to explore receiving. And so it's an interesting thing because it also allowed me to see that I was an overgiver. And now I think of this in this way, that this giving and receiving is really this infinity circuit of energy where there appears to be a giver and there appears to be a receiver. But when we meet in the sweet spot in the middle, there's only love and we're all transformed. And so this has huge implications for the summit and the work of delving into our money blocks. And later when I tell you another story that's related to the development of the charity, it will start to become clear how the seeds of our trauma can also become the flowers of our destiny. And of course, I've reinvented myself and followed so many different professional paths. Each time I did that, I had to reimagine and rework, this whole issue of could I make a living? Would I be safe? And so in terms of the work that we do in whatever profession it is, and whether it's in our families, with our children, like just know that that sweet spot in the middle is the opportunity for everyone. And if there's no receiver, there can't be a giver. And so that's why it's in this infinity circuit of energy. So I know I've talked a lot here. Just want to give you an opportunity to guide to the next.
Boy, that was so good. I was just going to let you go because it was so riveting. There were about, 20 different things we can jump off from there. You had so many great one-liners, but I wanted to go back and highlight when you said, I'll never have the resources I need. And that was very resounding then. And that's the one that kind of revisits you. And it sounds like whenever there's a new incarnation in your work and in your business, this is the one that's like, here I am, back to visit again. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think this is super common and all of us in some way are nodding our heads like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think in the context, I'll tell you a little bit about Rwanda. As some people know, that was my initial humanitarian call in 2007 was to go to Rwanda and teach my trauma healing techniques to widow and orphan genocide survivors. And I found myself in a room of 100 orphan head of households. These are young people who, at the time of the genocide, were 6 to 8 years old and given 2 to 6 other children to raise with no visible means of support. And had, by the time I met them 13 years later, devoted their lives to their siblings and pretty much gave up their lives for that. And as I was working with them, I began to tell them a little bit about my story of when I was 12, not in any way comparable to what they'd experienced, but I realized in that moment that this moment of grace came over me as it did during my near-death experience. And I realized I could connect with these people because I had experienced something similar. And everything in my life had brought me 9,000 miles across the globe to be with these 100 young people. So when I came back, so before I left Rwanda that time, the first time, they said, please don't forget us. Please tell our story and please come back. And I went, yes. And then I went, how am I going to do that? And yet I've gone back over 15 times now. And now that work has spread from Rwanda to Newtown, Connecticut, and the Sandy Hook tragedy, back to Australia, working with Aborigine and refugee populations, and then, of course, to our dear Parkland, the site of the Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School shooting, where I've been working for the last year. So that all sounds pretty big, and it all sounds like, oh, it just unfolded easily. But if we go back to the summer of 2007, in order for me to go to Rwanda at that time, I felt at that age and stage of my life that I should have the money. And that had been my desire, that when I reached that age, I would have the money to do these humanitarian things. It was not the case, as I was just going through a divorce and reinventing myself and moving from the East Coast to California.
Coming back from a near-death experience.
Well, these kinds of things. And also trying to build a practice here, a spiritual practice in California. And so when the call came I received an email saying, can we translate your first book, your stress management handbook, into Kinyarwanda? And I was like, whoa. I had followed the Rwandan genocide. I knew that Kinyarwanda was the language of Rwanda, and my heart just opened and leapt forward. And I said, yes, of course. And what else can I do? And they said, we want you to come here and teach this. And I was like, yes. And again, I went, how am I going to do that? And I really went deeply into meditation. And it was going to require about $10,000 for me to spend a month in Rwanda to do all the things that we needed to do there for transportation and translators and feeding people and getting to where we needed to go. Mm-hmm. And that just seemed completely out of the way crazy for me. And somebody suggested, why don't you ask people for money? Of all my traumas, that is right up there. Asking people for money was so attached to shame, and the shame of not being good enough, and I should have had enough money, and I should have blah, 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 all those shoulds. But interestingly enough, it was part of the work I did that summer to prepare myself for what I was going to see and be exposed to and work with in Rwanda. And so I went deep into the heart of my own darkness, deep into the heart of my own deepest fears and wounds and traumas. And that was really what prepared me spiritually to be fully present in my heart to the people that I would meet. But this money piece was key, because in all of this, it was the money thing that was triggering. I'm aware of my childhood traumas. I'm aware of the dark issues that need to be brought out into the light. But that money piece was like, whoa.
It's very sneaky and surreptitious.
Exactly. And it comes up in all kinds of ways and this is why that key word is resources, that I'll come back to. Because my spiritual teacher says miracles are access to resources. And so there's nowhere in there that says money. But anyway, that might be a takeaway for people.
I'm writing that down as we speak.
So, of course, I did my tapping work, and I actually had sessions with other people because I knew I couldn't get to this myself.
I'm glad you're saying this because I wanted to ask, well, you got to the deep, dark places. What were you doing? How were you helping yourself out?
Right. Well, specifically on the money piece, I knew that there are a lot of transgenerational trauma in there and personal trauma from my own um, not having enough money to get me through different things and whatnot. I started work when I was 12. I put myself through college, all of that. And so that summer, I decided once I felt clear, I sent out an email to probably 50 people, maybe 85 people. And it was and it was back in the day before MailChimp and before all these email servers where you had to cut and paste into every single email.
Yep.
And I made a decision to ask for this money. But I had to clear so many things. But once I cleared the shame of asking for money, and I came to a place of looking at it in a different way, that I was inviting people on this journey with me, people who believed in what I was doing, but couldn't necessarily accompany me or didn't have the skills or the ability. So it's interesting that the genocide took place over 100 days. I sent out my email shortly after the memorial in April that begins the memorial time of the genocide, April through July. And I was due to leave in September for Rwanda. And miracles just started raining. It started raining miracles. I would skip to the post box every day and there'd be some surprise from people I never heard of before. There would be $5 from an unemployed friend. There would be like coins from a second grade class from a teacher that I know, all the way to some, $1,000 donations that came out of nowhere because I had dropped my agenda about the form in which this money should come and instead looked at the function. And so the form, for me, I was too attached that I should do it, that I should come up with all the money. Anyway, it just kept raining miracles. And in the had I not done the receiving work previous that I did from my near-death experience, I would have felt shame every time I opened an envelope. Now I was like over the top giddy. And it fits into this spiritual practice that I teach, that I received in the near-death experience, where it's a strategy to transcend our ego so we can live in our hearts. And when we are in states of gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, grace drops in instantaneously. So the more grateful we are, the more loving we are, the more in wonder we are, the more the miracles we attract. So 100 days later, I had $22,000. And I was able to go to Rwanda with no worry.
Come on.
Seriously, it was crazy good. And people, again, I met all kinds of people I didn't even know. And I just had this vision of hearts lighting up around the world. And that's exactly what happened. So, these are shorter versions than what really happened, but that enabled me to really use the resources I needed to help the people that I was working with in Rwanda. It helped me come back and create a charity and gave me the impetus to continue this work for the last 12 years now, 12 years. And it's been extraordinary. But every time I have to do a big fundraising campaign, I have to revisit. Can I do this again? Can I do this again? And all year long, I'm in that fundraising mode. And I would say, I'm a boots on the ground kind of girl, and I just want to go do my work. So, but I will say the gift of depending on this fundraising has changed me so much and has literally was more of a miracle than if I had paid for it myself. I mean, of course, I invest my own funds, but because of that wound and overcoming that wound, I wouldn't be in the place that I am now, connected to people all over the world, thousands of people all over the world. And so there again, and that my destiny continues to expand beyond even my imagination. And so that money became access to resources, and access to resources became money, and it became that infinity circuit.
There we are again.
And the invitation to realize that people were excited to participate, excited to hear about what we were doing, inspired by the stories of the people that we have worked with all these 12 years. And so everyone is receiving a gift. And everyone gives, even if it's not their monetary resource, some kind of intellect, their love. Love is the most, I feel everyone's love behind me when I'm doing the work that I'm doing. So I would invite people to really also look at form versus function when it comes to money. Do you need that motorboat, or do you need access to a motorboat? So on the weekends, what is it that you can imagine beyond what your bank account is telling you right now?
I'm so excited you're talking about this. I was hoping that we would get into a little bit of that story of form versus function for you was so gorgeous. But B, how can we apply that to, maybe we're not looking to do a charitable service somewhere far away, but maybe there's something else that we're looking for. Like you said, maybe it's not the motorboat, but it's access to a motorboat. Maybe it's not, I want to live by the ocean. Maybe it's not owning the home, it's renting the home, or whatever it is. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe some of the experience you've had working with other people around this?
Mm-hmm. Well, most of the people that I work with are professionals in their field that want to make a difference and give back. And some people are in the state that I was in, where I wanted to give back, but I was thinking I don't have the money to do it. And of course, my story blows that myth right there. Other people have the resources, but may not know how to channel those resources. And so what I encourage people to do their own healing work first, number one, before they jump into giving back, because oftentimes giving back is kind of assuages the healing that we need to do for ourselves, if that makes any sense.
Oh, I think that's a huge point. So like, you can't just buy back the work that needs to be done on yourself, or, give a little time to someone else. And as lovely as that feels, and as wonderful of a biochemistry that it can create for you, there might be some other healing work to do as well.
Well, because, sometimes in these situations where people's hearts are so big and they want to give back and they volunteer in a crisis, but they themselves are not grounded enough or have not done enough trauma healing work to be able to be present to what they're experiencing. And so then we end up taking care of the volunteers and that kind of thing. So being able to move inside, look at those wounds and traumas and see how money is related to that. So that when you bring yourself to give money or receive money, it's in that purity of flow. And I'm not forgetting the question that you asked, but I help many, many people figure out how to get to follow their passion, again, even when, quote unquote, the money's not there. So I'll give you an example. In Newtown, Sandy Hook Elementary School tragedy, I went for what I thought was 3 weeks. It turned out to be 3 years. I worked with a group of 24 volunteers, and we did a very deep dive into our own traumas, deep dive into clinical evidence-based EFT for trauma. And I told them that they might not all be tapping with Newtowners, but that if they went deeply into this process, using tapping and the grace process, that they could bring it back to their communities, back to their families, back to their workplaces, wherever they felt impassioned to serve. And since that time, so many of those volunteers are now in their dream jobs. They have their own humanitarian aid projects, whether that's local or international. And so it's a pathway for that. And those people, we talk about the access to resources. So those people who thought they were making the abundance lists of the physical things they wanted, now they've switched that into the what is going to build their gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, so that they can embrace and play and be joyful about their relationship with money. So I'm not thinking of a specific person in mind in terms of that.
But you said there that all of these people are doing whatever the thing was that they wanted to do. And you said that they went and worked on their own issues to get there. Mm-hmm. So before we started this recording, we were talking a bit about the personal peace procedure within, like, using EFT tapping to help us get basically these results we're talking about. So do you mind speaking a bit about that? But also, you said you were training them and it was an evidence-based EFT work that they did. So I'd love it if you could talk about this, but also with the idea of safety behind it, because well, I'm going to let you say what needs to be said.
Well, so first, there's a very distinct difference between EFT for self-care and clinical EFT for trauma. Clinical EFT for trauma requires a certified practitioner. I believe those people should also be licensed mental health professionals if we're going into deep trauma. And obviously the avenues and the places that I'm in are in extreme trauma. So the self-care that many people learn is wonderful. It's great, but it's very important that if you uncover a trauma, or if you start to get too hijacked, I call it, if your physiology becomes too overwhelming, it's important to safely stop the process and have access to a professional practitioner to help you with that. Okay. So, and certainly if you are currently experiencing PTSD or the effects of trauma, you would need to be guided in your self-care tapping. And so again, EFT is so powerful, and as we know, it peels away the layers so that we can get to our core issues and our limiting beliefs, so we can clear not only the symptoms, but the causes. So I just caution people around that. Now, the personal peace procedure is a self-care technique, and just basically you make a list, in this case, of any money triggers you have, any money triggers, any issues or anxiety you have around money, around spending money, about making money, about having it, about keeping it. And you look through all of those thoughts that continue to show up in your head all the way from childhood to the current day, and just make a list. You know, I still think about when Johnny stole my piggy bank. I still think, you know, whatever those things that when they come up, you have some kind of, 0 to 10, like 2 or above, or 3 or above reaction to. And make that list, and then, just methodically go through it and pick 3 things a day to spend 15 or 20 minutes tapping on. And you'll also find that there will be not just the issues around money directly, but the ones that are underneath it, like I couldn't go to the slumber party because I didn't have new pajamas, or, that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we talked about in last year's summit, and it will come up again in this year's summit, that sometimes resolving the money issues, as is evidenced by all those people you did that trauma work with, probably had very little to do with specific money stories, or not entirely to do with money stories, but with all of the other, worthiness underneath, and understanding where their resources can come from, and all of the interesting stuff that comes up when you work on money blocks. But then also to say that sometimes you could be tapping on, well, Johnny took my piggy bank, or I didn't have the pajamas, and then something bigger comes up. So that is when, if you feel, whoa, this is too much for me, that you have the help.
Yes.
That you need, or you have a resource that you can go to, so that we don't say like, yes, I'm going to take it all on. And just so that we don't end up flooding and putting ourselves in a state where like we wanted to get here, and then we kind of made a little explosion over here on our way, so we can't finish it off.
Well, something that might be helpful to speak about also, and this is I'm very passionate about explaining, I'm really trying to evolutionize the way we do therapy. And I'm trying to educate people on the brain dysfunction that trauma and extreme stress causes. So that this is trauma is a physiological reaction in the brain that freezes the amygdala and the hippocampus from doing the work they need to do. It keeps us in our reptilian brain, keeps us from accessing our prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of our problem solving, our creativity, our sense of connectedness, intuition. And I believe that EFT, I sometimes call EFT body prayer, because what it does is it resets our physiology to that place of peace in our hearts, so we can then be in an open receiving place. And so much of my work is explaining that clinical EFT is able to literally reset the amygdala and the hippocampus and get the flow of endorphins running through our bodies. We now have a body of research that we're doing MRI studies. My colleague, Dr. Peter Stapleton, really urge everyone to...
Whose book just came out.
Which is going to really be a huge tipping point for us. And in fact, I'm on my way tomorrow to Australia to MC and keynote at the Mind Heart Conference. So we're really excited. But most importantly, to get that word out, that there's a physiological basis to EFT that regular talk therapy and other forms of therapy does not achieve, or may achieve, but take a really long time and create more suffering for the client.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So Lori, your lovely foundation is going to be the recipient of this year's Money Mindset Summit, which I'm so excited about. So can you tell us a few more stories about the really cool work that you get to do in the various places you've been?
Sure. Well, it really started with me coming back from Rwanda the first time, and instead of my heart breaking, my heart broke open to the possibilities. These people touched my heart so deeply. And of course, as I mentioned, I had experienced some of the traumas, that these young people had. So I asked again to receive, how can we help these young people? And what I received was guidance around what I call Project Light Rwanda. And Light stands for Heart-Centered Leadership Inspires Global Healing and Transformation. And the notion is that if we, again, nurture our young people and help our traumatized people to heal, rather than perhaps go into terrorism or other, things that are not supportive of our world, and help them get jobs and become economically sustainable, and then teach them to be those leaders, our world could truly change. And if those young people could be in communication with young people around the world who had that opportunity, then the next generation could perhaps solve the problems that we have not been able to solve. So we started with Project Light. We started with 12 orphan genocide survivors who graduated from the poorest residential high school in Rwanda, and put them through a 4-week training program using those 3 pillars. Long story short, we created a documentary about that, which people can see for free on my website. But we have tracked those 12 and supported those 12 young people since 2011. And they, 8 of them have been through university, 4 of them have been set up in businesses, 2 of them have been through grad school. I can't say that it has not been a clear path to economic sustainability because the Rwandan economy is very tenuous. But those young people, every time during Memorial Time, are community leaders. They lead community healing with tapping. They are lights for the world. And they reach out to the people I'm working with wherever I'm working, like in Newtown. The beauty was in connecting my project-led ambassadors with the young people in Newtown and inspiring the young people in Newtown who had been traumatized and lost siblings to, in fact, begin giving back, because there were other people around the world who were just as traumatized, if not more. So the dream of Project Light began to unfold. And then the refugee populations and indigenous people have always been deep in my heart. And it's as if I have this intention and the call comes through. And the call came to go to Australia. And here again, how am I going to get to Australia? I'm doing Rwanda and Newtown, but beautiful fundraising, beautiful miracles of fundraising. And now after 2 years, where I'm going on country, working with young people. But most importantly, the method has changed now. Our approach, instead of the one-on-one approach, what I'm doing is working on scaling and replicating these techniques to the service providers, mental health people, and parents who are nurturing these young people.
Fantastic.
And that's really the new form that this has taken. And so it's a little different in terms of fundraising because people understand about, sponsoring people for education and sponsoring businesses. But here we are sponsoring what I call an army of peace builders to be able to be fully present in their hearts and have the effective tools they need to nurture those young people. And we're seeing that in so many different areas. And then, of course, it's also interesting. I never know when I will be responding to tragedy. And when I received the call about going to Parkland, Florida, just the day of the event called, again, I thought I would go a couple of times and we would train mental health professionals. But the resources kept coming, beautiful resources, beautiful collaborations on the ground that now allow me to be there 1 week a month. And I've trained over 150 mental health professionals in basic, what the EFT for trauma, the emotional triage techniques. 70 of those people have gone on for advanced study. And of course, our hope is that we can continue to support that community because it's going to take a long time. But we know, for example, the most amazing things that are happening in Parkland is that our practitioners are working with some people who lost children. We're also working with student survivors who are in the room or in the building. And those student survivors now are able to have the memories of what happened that day and not react and be completely neutral. And so they have access to their higher brain functioning. They don't get hijacked by alarms, by scenes on the news, by all of the things that are related to that. Now, it's not a perfect solution because there have since been traumas since the tragedy. But if we can start with getting people back into their daily lives, that's where it starts. The healing begins. So also to make a piece here, so if you can imagine that these kids are now being able to go back, we don't have access to everyone, but with resources, we're getting more and more access and getting these kids back into their quote unquote resiliency. And again, as I mentioned, other traumas follow that. And so we need to be diligent in maintaining that support. But the miracles are people saying, I couldn't go back to class because, I was feeling claustrophobic, or I couldn't see this image, or I couldn't study anymore. And now they're they're just beautifully functioning. So that's the passion that drives me. Those are the stories and the gifts that, keep this passion alive. And it's the young people that are going to take us forward.
And I know in Newtown, some of the kids themselves, after you help them to be in a space where they could go to class and feel okay about it and hear things on the news, but like you said, they started giving back as well.
Yes. Yeah. So we have JT Lewis, who lost his brother Jesse. But JT wouldn't go to school for months after, and but he didn't really like tapping. And but we tapped with his mom, and after I said to him, "How about a Skype session with my kids in Rwanda?" He said, "Sure." He was 12 at the time. We had to speak through a translator, which, the attention span of a 12-year-old isn't that big. But we got him on that Skype call, and two of my ambassadors, and I spoke with him. I never said a word to them. I did not tell them what to say or do. And then they led JT through a tapping exercise that they made up themselves. And it was so profound to watch the love between these people, these young people. So the next day, or that night, I came back to the home, and I said, "Where's JT?" And they said, "He's getting ready for school." I said, "What?" And he's writing an essay because he wants to go back to school and ask his classmates to raise money to send one of the ambassadors to university. And I was just like, I don't have to worry about the form anymore, because when we ignite the love and compassion in other people's hearts, it happens. And so JT has made quite a history for himself, and continues to, traveling around the world, actually, speaking about his healing and his transformation and his giving back. And he raised enough money to send one of our ambassadors to university. It ended up being two ambassadors to university. And of course, it has changed the ambassadors' lives, because they realize that people care about them around the world. I believe it's transformed JT's life. And so we had another 12-year-old girl in the Newtown area who also wanted to raise money to send our ambassadors to university. And every summer for the last 6 summers, she's raised money, and she's raised over $12,000 now. So I say I'm in the business of exploiting 12-year-olds to raise money for me. But what they receive from it is this great sense of global citizenship, great sense of love for the people they're helping. And of course, then those people's lives are changed. And this is really how we're going to spark hearts around the world and get this work of global healing done.
So you said, you used the metaphor, army of peace bringers, army of peace
builders.
Peace builders. So us donating to your charity through our summit this year, talking about all of our money blocks, is to help build this global citizenship of army of peace builders.
Yes, because truly, as we clear our trauma of our money blocks, we have resources, we have access to resources. We can really get this stuff done. We can find, I believe that if there's 7.5 billion people on the planet, and we all just align by our passions and really mobilize that passion, we can reform the justice system, we can reform the environment, we can, do all of these things that are necessary for that to flow. And imagine all these hearts lit up around the world in abundance and receiving, because you get as much as you give.
Mm-hmm. And like you said earlier, no one can give if you can't receive, and vice versa. So back to that flow.
And the access to resources is, I may give you my money, but I want to give you my money because I care about children, traumatized children. So then I go do my thing and send back the reports. And you're like, I'm making a difference, even though I'm not there on the ground. And so that gives me the resources then to give back in the ways that I do, and do what I need to do to take care of myself in these environments, and to inspire as many people as possible. So I'm inviting, actually, I'll invite, set a tone for the summit to even go deeper, that by healing your money blocks, you're going to find the seeds of your destiny and your passion. And whether that means locally in your families or in your work or in your communities, it all makes a difference. And so when we use EFT, we're building peace builders from the inside out. With EFT, we receive peace in our hearts. So then we have that motivation, that authentic, loving motivation to give back in whatever way we feel makes our hearts sing.
Lori, you just said it so beautifully there. Thank you so much for having this chat and for starting off our summit, and for all of the amazing work that you do so that we can say, yes, we support it here. Thank you for doing this, because we don't all have the resources and the background to be doing what you do. But it's, again, part of that figure eight. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. And I'll be following that summit very closely.
Absolutely.